Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Square Circle Podcast with your host, Marie Shadows. And on this episode, we will be talking everything Jon Moxley and crew, which is the Death Riders, some story build-up between Jon Moxley versus Orange Cassidy, the Jon Moxley interviews, and maybe if I remember and have time to talk about Jon Moxley's video that he sent over to New Japan Pro Wrestling because Shota Umino feels some type of way. But I might mention it. That needs a whole podcast of its own to really talk about it, the story, and really talk about how the fans sort of shaped what Shota is currently feeling and dealing with and having this identity crisis because he is so linked to Jon Moxley, which is, again, created by the fans and New Japan Pro Wrestling and management, and even probably Moxley himself and Shota were like, okay, we could go with this. That's why sometimes the fans on Twitter, whoever is left, because most of them went over to Blue Sky, whoever is left on Twitter, those fans say a lot of things. Those fans say that they support wrestlers. Those fans are in the moment of like that dopamine that they get when they're like, oh my God, I love these two wrestlers. Oh my God, they're so great together. Oh my God, I can imagine all their fantasy opponents. And then 6 months down the line, you don't hear a word from them at all on their favorite wrestler. Nowhere on Twitter. And I kind of question those kind of fans because they are so in the moment that they will just get blindsided and say what they feel and how they think and then don't really support the rest of the way. And that's why I think that for Shota Umino's case, this is what's happening. And I don't know if he knows how to break from it because still trying to follow in Moxley's footsteps while trying to be half Tanahashi as well and getting a mixed reaction from the Japanese fans. It's one of those mind-boggling things of Shota is a really good wrestler. And I really like the way that Shota wrestles. However, he has yet to understand what his character is truly about. So he is frustrated. And he called out Jon Moxley. And Jon Moxley sent this weird video over to New Japan Pro Wrestling. And of course, I had to say something about it on Twitter, which I guess we'll get into this for a little bit because it's only going to be a little bit that I talk about it. So when I saw the Jon Moxley promo that was directed towards Shota and Jon just brushing Shota off, I kind of basically said that this is the first time that Moxley pays attention to social media. This is the first time that he's actually paying attention to what's happening over in New Japan Pro Wrestling. And of course, I get told that I don't know anything, that I haven't been covering New Japan for the longest to know where there is a pattern and there isn't a pattern. And there's a pattern when it comes to Jon Moxley that he picks and chooses when to do marketing for stuff, or he just doesn't care, or just not really social media savvy. So that's why sometimes we don't really get what we should get, especially when this is international between America and Japan, obviously. So by Jon Moxley actually giving a video in response to Shota is kind of shocking because the buildup between Jon Moxley and Evil was done so poorly that's why I said on my own Twitter account at Marie_Shadows, if you're not following me, make sure you follow me. That's why I said that this is like the first time he actually remembered to do something, remembered to give us something, so that way there could be some build to it. Also, on the flip side, that Shota is currently focusing on facing Zack Sabre Jr. at Wrestle Kingdom 19. And some subtle mentions of Moxley because Shota still uses some of Moxley's techniques and Moxley's finisher, which I'm saying spoiler right now because as of today, 11/22/2024, Shota Umino has pinned our IWGP champion Zack Sabre Jr. during World Tag League in a tag team match. Now, yes, somebody in the comments might point out that I use the word our. I am still indifferent to Zack Sabre Jr. being the IWGP champion, but nonetheless, he is champion. He's better than Moxley, even though I really don't like Zack like that, but I do have some appreciation for his technical ability. However, sometimes his booking can just get me frustrated about what happens in a New Japan ring and New Japan management. However, I will say again, spoiler alert, Shota Umino has pinned the IWGP World Heavyweight Champion, and that's something going into Wrestle Kingdom 19. And that's why I say that maybe a conversation like this to really talk about Shota Umino, to really talk about Zack Sabre Jr., to talk about the young guys in New Japan Pro Wrestling deserves its own podcast and maybe a couple people on there, because I need some different perspectives. My perspective on Shota is that he's a very good in-ring performer. He has the potential. I really do like him. He could be really big in New Japan and then expand globally if he ever wanted to. However, this combination of being half Tanahashi, half Moxley, and getting a boo and cheer reaction depending on what's happening and the Japanese fans in that moment and where they are in Japan when they do the tours can be a very good study guide for any other wrestlers out there that ever listens to the Square Circle podcast, because there is good and bad in everything, and then there's also ugly, but there's good and bad, and there's ways to fix certain things. I tend to look at professional wrestling and break down professional wrestling in terms of, okay, these are the strengths. We know that these are the strengths, but what are the weaknesses? And let's focus on the weaknesses and give ideas to improve those weaknesses. Because if you can improve those weaknesses, you'll have the full package. We're not saying that you have to be completely perfect and stay perfect and have this pretty high standard. But as long as you're staying the course and you're having these mini victories to be celebrated along the way, then I think that is worth it. So that is my take on Jon Moxley just sending in a video to New Japan Pro Wrestling, finally doing some marketing for building up something, and it was still incoherent to Shota Umino, and then revealing to you guys that Shota got the pin over Zack Sabre Jr. By the way, if you guys have any comments about that, please let me know. What did you guys think about it? What is your opinion on Shota Umino? Do you think he's a good wrestler? Do you think he has to change up his character? Do you think that he should just stay the course? Like, let me know your perspectives down in the comments below, whether this is on Spotify and or YouTube, or even on marieshadows.substack.com, my wrestling newsletter. You guys can leave comments on those places. Spotify now accepts comments, and Spotify now has polls. So make sure to leave me a comment or I should say, vote in the polls when I put this up on Spotify. Before we get into the bulk of this podcast episode, which is dedicated to Jon Moxley and crew and Jon Moxley himself and Orange Cassidy and the story that they're building and how it could be so much more, let me just plug in a couple more stuff. If you're not following me on Twitter, please go follow me on Twitter at Marie_Shadows. If you enjoy Discord communities, I do have a Discord community called Shadows Den. The link to that Discord community will be down in the description box below. That means that you can click on it on Spotify and you can click on it on YouTube. If you guys are over on YouTube, make sure that you are following Square Circle Podcast by Marie Shadows over on Spotify. That follow does amazing things. It lets you know when I drop a new episode, so you are never out of the loop. And if you can give it a star rating, that would be great. That would be highly appreciated, so it could go into the algorithm and more people can hear about professional wrestling and opinions and breakdowns, and it just builds a wonderful, wonderful community. I cannot do this without you. And if you're over on the YouTube side and you appreciate the YouTube side a little bit more, make sure to hit that subscribe button on youtube.com/Square Circle Podcast. You'll be joining the family, which I will be so appreciative of. You'll be helping our goal to get into the YouTube partner program. And I know I took some time off because I had a family member that needed surgery and they are in recovery at the very moment. So that is why I took some time off, and I managed to get time today to basically do this podcast episode and send it out to the world. And so more videos will be coming. We are getting closer and closer to YouTube partner, and I miss doing live streams with each and every one that shows up in chat. So if you guys want to join the family and help that out, all you have to do is just subscribe for free and comment down below, and we have a wonderful time. And if you also want to follow me on my wrestling newsletter, that will be marieshadows.substack.com. There are going to be some videos that I cannot post on YouTube per copyright guidelines. So the newsletter, marieshadows.substack.com, is the way to go. And then also on my fourth wall, which is very, very similar to a Patreon, will also be available. My merch is on there. Support the brand, support the channel, support the podcast, support everything. And every single thing that I talked about here that I am plugging will be links all in the description boxes of both Spotify and YouTube. Okay, so let's get into everything Jon Moxley. I do want to start out by saying that I have picked certain things to talk about, and if someone in the comments is like, see, she picks and chooses what she wants for her own narrative, I'm only picking certain things to talk about and break down because they seem more important than everything else that is out there. And then I don't want this podcast episode to be 2 hours long or 3 hours long. This is not a once a month podcast or a once every 2 weeks podcast where you can go longer. This is a almost daily podcast, weekly podcast. I haven't really put a time frame on it, but I just know how people tend to act when we start talking about Jon Moxley, when we start talking about AEW. They want to hear themselves talk, and most of the time they don't want to do their own work if they don't like what I have to say. So we are going to start with this Twitter posting that I had on Twitter, again, at Marie_Shadows, where I was going back and forth with a former acquaintance that we obviously no longer talk, but I met this person, Clive. If he ever listens to this, the only reason why I'm dropping his name is out of transparency, not out of anger or malice or anything like that. It's just out of transparency, because if he happens to hear this, or someone else that knows him happens to hear this, I don't want there to be like trying to figure it out like it's Clive. Just saying. He used to follow and chat with me on Twitch when I was streaming on Twitch. If you want to follow my Twitch, twitch.tv/Marie_Shadows. I don't really use it as much. I might get back to it, but I am really trying to grow my YouTube. But anyway, on Twitter, this happened on November 6, 2024. Wrestling Inc. had put a Twitter post and a video of, let me read you the caption. Claudio tossing Orange around like he's weightless. Hashtag AEW Dynamite. And what the video is showing is that Orange Cassidy was on top of Pac, and it was going for the 1, 2, 3. But before the referee can count 1, 2, 3, it was 1, 2. Here comes Claudio coming into the ring, grabbing Orange Cassidy by the waist. And yes, tossing him around like he is weightless and driving him on his knee. Basically driving Orange Cassidy down on Claudio's knee. That's how that looks, right? Of course, Wrestling Inc. don't get no flack for this from AEW fans. But the moment that I question it, and question it in an objective way, I'm the one that ends up getting the flack. So here it is. I basically quote tweeted and said, I'm reading this verbatim. And AEW fans are supposed to believe that Orange Cassidy is supposed to save AEW when Claudio is throwing him around like a rag doll. Seeing that breaks kayfabe, and the story being told looks embarrassing too. It really is. You have a big muscle-bound guy in Claudio Castagnoli, even though he is somewhat lean muscle, but he has muscle, he has strength. He has a unique way of working out and getting that physique versus Orange Cassidy, who is a small guy and a very lean muscle guy who doesn't have that much strength as Claudio Castagnoli or even as Pac. So yes, it's going to make him look very small. It's going to make him look very embarrassing. And how is this babyface who is getting tossed around like nothing supposed to convince the AEW audience that this small, lean guy can take on Jon Moxley that has muscle and strength and mass to him? Like, how does that work? I am all for underdog stories. There are ways to do underdog stories. And again, I don't like to have my podcast like the but WWE. However, Rey Mysterio had a really good underdog story where people believe that he could dethrone whoever it was at the time and that he could beat Big Show. I remember he beat Big Show and stuff like that. That is when it is done right. So let me get into the tweet. Clive comes in with, or shows his resilience. My response to that is, resilience, question mark. A lean muscle body can't absorb Claudio's power attacks and act like, keep going. It looks embarrassing. It destroys any believability for Orange to be savior and dethrone Mox. But AEW will find a way. If this part didn't happen, then AEW fans can keep the delusion. To which Clive tells me, you seem to disallow the suspension of disbelief when it comes to AEW. Every wrestling promotion there has ever been tells stories in the ring that aren't physically viable or realistic. Darby Allin has the endurance of John Wick. Hulk Hogan didn't sell if he hawked up. Someone Rey Mysterio's side can stand across from Brock Lesnar. Liv Morgan can beat Ronda Rousey. It shouldn't make sense, but we leave that part of reality at the door when we enter the realm of wrestling. Now, I reply with, like, you're talking to me as if you don't know me, but we obviously know each other. But that was just, like, a weird approach to take to try to tell me these things as if, like, I have to agree or be like, oh yeah, you're right, I see your point. You know, I didn't mean to try and really look at why Claudio did what he did. That really makes it take everything out of that reality. I do believe that there is suspension of disbelief when it comes to professional wrestling. I do understand that when underdogs appear to have their stories be told, it's done right. My post in response to that, which I'm highlighting a specific part, but certain moves can destroy all believability for a wrestler that to be that guy to dethrone Mox. And that's what Claudio did, and that's what I was trying to get across during this whole entire conversation, is that sometimes when wrestlers go in there to try to get their shit in, to try to do things that they normally do, they forget about the cause and effect of what it can have upon the audience. Because by going in there and rolling in and just yanking Orange Cassidy off of Pac just to stop the 1, 2, 3 count and then tossing him around like he is weightless, like a feather, does nothing to convince an audience that this is the guy that I should be cheering for. This is the guy that I should be like, oh no, you meanie Claudio, you shouldn't be doing that. Like, my guy is gonna win, but it doesn't have that effect. Now, this next tweet from Clive, I'm going to read the second part. When it comes to the suspension of disbelief in wrestling, by its very nature, it can't be logical. It is just subjective based on whether you like the story or not. And this was my main problem with having conversations with him and seeing other conversations on Twitter, because everything is public, is that he looked through the eyes of everything being subjective. And this is just my observation, not even slandering, no menacing behind it. You can tell what person has as patterns. And subjectively, this isn't about whether I like it or not. When content creators are talking about AEW and how to grow AEW and what to fix in AEW, most of the time, 90% out of 100%, and I'm being very generous with that 90%, most of the time it is subjective because they are selfish and they want it their way and they react without listening and without thinking. Sometimes when these fans present their position on what they want to improve, what they don't want to improve, most of the time it feels like it is their own opinions trying to be forced as facts and trying to be very subjective about it. However, when you are used to listening, sometimes they do have constructive criticism that is objective in their whole entire conversation and the talking points, until you get to a point where you kind of realize it's the same talking points within the same echo chamber of the spaces that they're around. That was the main issue, is that everything is subjective, and it's like, no, I'm not calling out this spot from Claudio Castagnoli just tossing Orange Cassidy around as if like I didn't like it. If that was the case, I would have started my original tweet as I didn't like this and go off on some rant. No, I basically was looking at it and basically asked a question. And this is how the AEW audience is supposed to believe that Orange Cassidy is the savior when Claudio totally destroyed that. How do you come back from a bigger guy tossing you around like nothing? And throughout this conversation, I do mention that when something is happening like this, you have to look at the storyline, the story beats, the setup to have the fans actually react to it. Nobody was reacting to it. And being resilient doesn't mean that you allow somebody to ragdoll you in the air and then just toss you down on the ground and you're selling your side and you're like, oh my God, this hurts. As a wrestler, like, how is that resilience? Resilience is trying to get back up and trying to not have that happen and trying to outsmart someone that can clearly toss you around like it's nothing. So I want to read my end tweet where I think it's very, very important for people to hear out there. If you constantly look at and enjoy AEW through a subjective lens, you're always going to think that the constructive criticism is wrong, hurtful, and not realizing that the person wants AEW to get better. Same goes for opinions that differ from the status quo for brownie points. Because throughout this whole thread, I do make it apparent that everyone that still praises AEW is living in Delulu land. They are delusional. They are still praising a product that they know that it's not up to standard. And even if the company is 5 years old, Tony Khan has all this money, all this inheritance money, but he wants the guys who are already professionals to be TV ready when most of them are not even TV ready, and doesn't want to invest in his product because it is a vanity product. When you have a vanity project, you barely try to invest in it to make it the best that it can be. and you don't really invest in the people that are with you in this vanity project, because it is a narcissistic project. And sometimes people can't see beyond that, because the accomplishment that they want to talk about and the accomplishment that they want in the headlines is that they did it. They completed a dream that they had since they were little, and the money got them that dream. It wasn't even building from the ground up. It was the money got it, they paid for it, and here it is. They're playing around with it, and they're messing up things. But they don't see that they're messing up things, and we can call it out so many times, but it doesn't really get through because narcissistic people are narcissistic people. I don't want to stay too long on the thread. It does detour into non-topic stuff, because when you give a full explanation as to why you say the things that you say and how you break down professional wrestling, it always goes off to the side. But I will say this is that do not give this creator hate. We no longer follow each other on Twitter, which is totally okay. I just wanted to bring this up to give more clarification when I can, just because it's one of those things of that AEW fans need to realize when somebody is deconstructing something, bringing something to their attention, and even to AEW's attention about this is not good for Orange Cassidy. If you are trying to make me believe that this guy can be the savior, you don't let Claudio Castagnoli do that. You take him to the side and you're like explaining to him, meaning Claudio, that dude, that made him look bad. We're trying to make Orange Cassidy look like what Jon Moxley think he is, so that way the fans can truly be behind a serious Orange Cassidy and not somebody that can get ragdoll and be weightless and stuff. That's not me saying I didn't like it. That's me doing an oversight and being like, hey, we got to change that. We can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. So that's not me saying I didn't like it, aka being subjective. I will say that that is the pattern of every time that I saw his posts. So I am commenting and observing on a pattern that I see. So I'm just covering my bases, covering my ass, just because I know somebody out there will put some type of comment about it. But yeah, it does go off into just stuff that doesn't make sense because it's bickering back and forth in a way. And I know what my point was. I don't know if he knew what his point was, but I will say that sometimes people just need to stay on topic with what is being discussed and not throw in random stuff or anything that has nothing to do with the topic at hand. The only reason why I was talking about it, because again, I wanted to talk about it a little bit more. So I will ask this question, because apparently in the thread, the person thinks that it is improper to say everyone lives in delusion land. So I'm going to ask this question. Do you agree or disagree that if somebody who gives constructive criticism to AEW and AEW fans / audience, do you agree or disagree? And you can expand upon it in the comments if you want to, that it is improper to say everyone lives in delusion land, because I don't think it's improper. It is everything that we've seen. It's all the patterns that we've seen on Twitter, and definitely the speech patterns and from the bots. By the way, you guys know that AEW has been paying for bots, right? They have been appearing under different types of AEW social media, and you can definitely spot them out. And I have been spotting them out for a while now. So if you want to go read that thread, again, it's on my Twitter at Marie_Shadows. And it's one of those where, again, my whole thing about professional wrestling and the Square Circle podcast and what I talk about is to break down professional wrestling in an objective way. Not even in a subjective way, unless something personal is having me talk about it. Like when I didn't claim Jon Moxley was our previous IWGP former World Heavyweight Champion, you guys were with me through that. That we can say was subjective because I didn't like, I will repeat it again. I did not like that Jon Moxley was the IWGP World Heavyweight Champion just to check a box and just so that way TK can say that he did that too. So I didn't like that. So we can say that that period in time was me being subjective. But if I am breaking down why it was bad for Claudio Castagnoli to just yank Orange Cassidy off of Pac and tossing him around like a rag doll, that is objective. That is me breaking down professional wrestling. That is me being like, this is why it really hinders the believability of Orange Cassidy dethroning Mox, even if he's not going to dethrone Mox. That's not the future I'm looking at. I'm looking at a particular point in time on AEW Dynamite where this happens, and I'm breaking it down, and that is the difference. That is what I do on the Square Circle podcast. That's what I do on my lives when I am able to break down professional wrestling matches. I broke down the professional wrestling match between Io Sky versus Utami. I broke down the matches of AJ Styles versus Marufuji. I even went so far to find some women matches and broke those matches down. So that is what we do here. We break down professional wrestling matches. And I don't say, I don't like this, I don't like that, unless it's something similar to me not liking Jon Moxley being a former IWGP champion. But again, please do not give him any kind of shit at all. Do not do that. I only talk about these things to give perspective and expand on more explanation because I do not have Twitter Blue. If somebody wants to gift me a Twitter Premium or an X Premium subscription, that would be fantastic. I would definitely appreciate that. But again, do not give no hate to this person. Nothing at all. This is more for educational purposes to talk about it and to really think about why wrestlers need to be more mindful of the story that's being told, any kind of in-ring story, and more. Okay, so let's go over some of the interviews that Jon Moxley has done, because sometimes I wish Jon Moxley does not do interviews because he has a bunch of word salad. For some reason, he can get into a ring, cut a promo, still be a word salad, and it will sound like he is coherent. But when you get him on someone's podcast or a publication, there's just a really weird thing that happens where I'm like, I don't understand if he understands what he's talking about, and it just doesn't come off right because he says things that he wants to see in AEW improve and talk about infrastructure, this, and there's nothing in place for the young guys to succeed. And it's like, well, have you talked to your boss, Tony Khan, lately? It's one of those kind of scenarios of like, you're going to complain and then try to shit on the fans who are giving constructive criticism the same way that you're giving constructive criticism, but say that the fans are the problem and the fans are toxic and this and that. And it's like, please stop doing interviews. Because if you're not going to understand the landscape that is social media, then you're not going to understand when you log into social media and what you're seeing. Social media is never going to be perfect, okay? It's never going to be perfect. Social media is man-made. Algorithms are man-made. Everything is man-made on the internet. And for those of us that are not anonymous with wrestler profile pictures, anime profile pictures, no profile pictures, you can be whoever you want to be on the internet without repercussions sometimes. And if you want to have a cleaner timeline, to have people that have common sense, to have people that know how to have a good conversation, even if you agree to disagree, and those people do not do any kind of name calling, but for some reason that one particular day you're going back and forth with somebody, you just be like, hey, I don't know, it got out of control. Let's just agree to disagree and maybe come back to it tomorrow. And they're like, all right, cool. Have a good night. You know, it was a good conversation. There's a way to clean up your timeline to see the good in people, even if the timeline and the algorithm is pushing all the negative stuff, because it is easy to push the negative stuff and the toxic stuff, which anybody can have any definition for what toxic is to them, just because people experience and read things and create scenarios in their mind that are different for everybody else. So there is an easy way to do that. And you can definitely do that by block, mute, and go. Even though Twitter has changed up how the block button works, which, by the way, it's kind of okay. It's kind of interesting because now you see where people lie, and if they block you, you're like, all right, cool, whatever, man. But at least that you have a chance to screenshot it and defend yourself if you need to defend yourself. But the point is that social media is never going to be perfect. When you log in after a long while of not being on social media, of course, the algorithm is going to remember what it saved for you before you decided to take your hiatus. So when you log back in, of course, you're going to see all the negative stuff, all the toxicity, and you're going to get so overwhelmed and so overstimulated that, of course, you're going to shit on the fans and you're going to shit on everybody else and think that social media is the worst place in the world, because Jon Moxley has said this once before. But again, that's what happens when people are just so simple-minded and just want to stay in the world that they're in, which there is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong from pulling the plug from social media and getting away from social media. However, as a society and as we continue to go forward, it is in everyone's best interest to at least understand social media and to at least understand technology as we go. Because if not, you're going to get left behind, and maybe something good will come from it, because then we can pivot to a different path where they can do a hybrid of not being so much on the grid versus being off the grid completely. You know what I mean? But I just say this as a social media is going to continue to influence everything that we do in society. So rather learn how to use social media, whether it's for hobby, business, or anything else. And even if you don't want to use it, at least have some type of knowledge in the back of your mind of, okay, so this is how we use social media, because it's going to change in the future. It's going to change in the next couple of months and years. The only reason why I bring this up and I don't really spend too much time talking about social media is because it's the same tired talking points of that we want AEW to grow, but at the same time, you have people that will shit on the fans and call them toxic without doing the research of, like, why are people arguing now? You don't have to comment on any of those arguments. You can just read some threads, go through the comments, and see what is happening, see the chatter. And because Jon Moxley in these interviews has so many big ideas that he really doesn't say, but understands the fundamentals of how to help out the young guys, sometimes in those threads, in those arguments, there are good people that have good conversations and constructive criticisms on how to fix AEW, and you could always pass them along to Tony Khan. But no, Jon Moxley just talks a big game and he does not stand on business. The interviews that I have read, he does not stand on business at all. He will talk the talk. He will try to implement the stuff on AEW, but as we saw this past Wednesday on Dynamite, that's not the kind of impact that you want, or the hard reset that you want, where it is Jon Moxley and crew, the Death Riders, standing around in a circle as Orange Cassidy is duct taped and tries to do those little puny shin kicks and then gets knocked down and is tired and can't get back up. And how does that reflect what Jon Moxley talks about in these interviews that we're about to go over? How does taping up Orange Cassidy, the biggest babyface that should be white hot in the wrestling business, everyone should be talking about Orange Cassidy, everyone should be praising Orange Cassidy, everyone should be like, look, Orange Cassidy is my guy, we're gonna go support him, we're gonna go do this, he's gonna go defeat Moxie and crew because Moxie and crew has taken over AEW and all this stuff, but he's duct taped. What? And I know that Orange Cassidy told Mark Briscoe, Ishii, and Rocky Romero to stay in the back, don't come out, don't help me, which is a very noble thing to do for a underdog. But you're going to need friends anyway to try and take Moxie down. I mean, they duct taped you with ease. With ease, they duct taped you because of the numbers game. This doesn't make anybody in AEW, the audience, I should say, feel like they should root for the babyface to get out of that, because it just wasn't right. That doesn't make him defiant. That doesn't make him resilient. He got tied up. He got caught. He got tied up in duct tape, and they pushed him to the ground when those puny little shin kicks didn't work. And I don't understand how the AEW audience is supposed to be like, yeah, that's my guy. He's gonna dethrone Moxley with his gimmick. And I'm like, yo, you gotta change that gimmick up. Moxley in those promos were saying that he could see a different side of Orange Cassidy. He wants a real sadistic Orange Cassidy. He wants this Orange Cassidy that I don't know what this Orange Cassidy is. He called Orange Cassidy a snake for leaving Wheeler Yuta, and now Wheeler Yuta is in the possession of Moxley and crew. Like, I don't understand. There is a disconnect. It's like, Moxley, what are you seeing that I'm not seeing, or that the other AEW fans are not seeing? What is it? There is a huge disconnect when it comes to Jon Moxley when he does interviews, because they are word salads. And there's a huge disconnect in the storytelling ability of Jon Moxley, Jon Moxley's crew, and this story of building up Orange Cassidy. I don't know what it is, but it is a disconnect and a half. And even me trying to put the pieces together, I don't know what it is. So let's get into these interviews. The first interview that we're going to get into is what I like to nickname the Sunglass Hut interview. So this is Jon Moxley, and he was interviewed by New York Sports Post. Jon Moxley says, and I quote, "There will be a lot of stuff that won't be part of this AEW. For example, earlier in the year, I was having a conversation or was around the conversation." I am going to stop right there, and I'm going to say, which is it, Jon Moxley? Were you having a conversation, or were you around a conversation? Are these two different incidents? Are these two different scenarios? Were you having a conversation while also eavesdropping on another conversation that you overheard? Which, by the way, listening to someone else's conversation is rude. So which is it? Were you having a conversation or were around a conversation? Was it both? Was it one or the other? So he continues to say, earlier in the year, I heard a backstage type person talking about interviews or pre-tapes or something. Again, How do you not know this person? Do you not go around the locker room every time you go to work, shake people's hands and be like, hey, what's up? How's it going? Welcome. Thank you for being at AEW. Thank you for everything that you've done. How do you not know who works for the company when AEW is not as big as WWE? He goes on to say in this quote, it was a situation where talents were not put in a position to succeed due to lack of preparation, framework, direction, and things like that. Hello, Jon Moxley. We have been saying the same thing for the last 5 years, myself and other content creators. And now you're saying this and we are agreeing with you. But again, I will say this. Have you talked to your boss, Tony Khan? Have you told him these things? Jon Moxley goes on to say, this individual, that backstage type of person, that's what Jon Moxley is saying right now. This individual said, well, it's bottom of the card. It doesn't matter. To which Jon Moxley says, can you imagine saying that? You're fucking fired. Go work at Sunglass Hut. Why is that the first thing that he thinks of is to go work at Sunglass Hut? Like, is that supposed to be an insult? Like, I don't know. Why is that the first thing? And why is that the first thing that you'll do is you're fired? Whatever happened to having a conversation with this backstage type of person that said that so you can get an understanding and a perspective as to why they would say what they say and then offer your perspective and your experience in the business and being on the top of the mountain in WWE and being like, look, man, you have to see everybody as sort of an equal here. You have to see that even the guys on the bottom of the card deserve some type of video for them, some type of noise for them, some type of platform from them. But no, Jon Moxley will be the worst manager to ever be under, because if he ever heard somebody talk about somebody but don't know about the conversation, he'll just be like, you're fired. Go work at Sunglass Hut. What? People forget how to talk to people and conversations, and that's how you end up making new friends, growing a community by having conversations and hearing somebody out when they have a difference of perspective and opinions than you. Conversation is the way to go. But Jon Moxley doesn't know how to have conversations. Jon Moxley goes further in this quote and says, you should be fucking pistol whipped for saying that. By the way, that was very concerning. That is a red flag for me. Sir, why are you using that kind of language? And I don't really like policing people's language except for always being consistent and saying, please do not use the N-word in any way, shape, or form, because I just personally do not like the N-word. But why are you trying to say that this person should get pistol whipped? Sir, I am concerned. Jon Moxley goes on to say, for one, everybody that is on the top of the card was at one time on the bottom of the card. That's how it works. You climb the ladder. That's not always how it works, because you do have your jobbers or enhancement talent. You do have your mid-carders where you're like, I don't think you could go any further than that unless you completely transform your character. And then you have your champion guys at the top. There's always going to be some type of structure. But yes, in most cases, or probably some cases. Let's go with most cases. In most cases, a bottom guy could be a top guy, and they could win multiple championship titles, and they could be on top of the world. Jon Moxley was there, but sometimes Jon Moxley makes it seem as if like he doesn't give credit to WWE for making him the star that he is today, and why we know who Jon Moxley is, / Dean Ambrose as well, because I think that's also worthy in this conversation, that WWE gave him that star power for why we're talking about him today. And most of the time, it feels like when he talks about stuff like this, as if he's just brushing over WWE, and now he considers himself one of the guys of the indies. Jon Moxley goes on to say in this quote by the New York Sports Post, You see this frustration or confusion from some of these talents because there's no fucking ladder. We have been saying this for 5 years, John. They don't know what to do. We've been saying this for 5 years, John. But you guys shit on us. They are just wandering in the desert. We're going to grab them and we're going to walk with them. Now, I do want to mention about the last part of that quote before we move on to the other ones, is that reminded me of the time where Jon Moxley is taking over AEW in the most safest way, not even edgy, not even controversial. And we're not even talking about him putting a bag over Danielson's head, because that should have never happened. But to take it over and really mean business and really call out Tony Khan and be like, look, man, you got to get things under control. You got to get this structure. These wrestlers are suffering. They're frustrated. I hear their voice and I'm going to be their voice for the voiceless. Play off of CM Punk. Maybe, maybe not. Right? I'm just throwing stuff off the top of my head. But that last line reminds me of when the Dark Order was feuding with Mox and crew and they kept getting beat up, and John Silver was running after the pickup truck and it looked so silly and weird. And it's like, you guys have all the power names, all the superstar names in that group, except for Wheeler Yuta and Marina Shafir. But Pac is somebody, Claudio Castagnoli is somebody, Jon Moxley is somebody, and these are all big guys, and all of the smaller guys and the smaller acts are going after the bigger guys, which again can prove to be a very good underdog story where the big guys, the big muscle guys, have to lose sometimes. But it just feels very WCW-esque in that the big guys beat up the little guys and it's supposed to make us care, and it's not making us care. But Jon Moxley doesn't understand that, because he thinks that all his ideas and everything that they do is really amazing, and it's not. It's like you are hurting the smaller guys, you are burying the smaller guys, and he is properly burying the smaller guys in terms of the definition. And it's like, you're not helping them, you're not going to help them grow by doing what you're doing, because none of those smaller guys were prepped to have a good babyface run where you can rely on them to save AEW. And no, Orange Cassidy does not count in this, because Orange Cassidy is Orange Cassidy. Yeah, he has matches. Yeah, he has promos here and there. But can you truly see that he can take people down? Even though he has taken down bigger guys in the past, it was by roll up. And it just, one of those things of like, it's not realistic. The timing on the bookings don't make sense to build up Orange Cassidy's character as a babyface. Because honestly, Moxie's crew is like this giant villain, even though we'll get to that in a second. But for the sake of this, Moxley's crew is just one big giant villain that should have the feel and the appeal to take them down because they want something a certain way. But then again, if you really think about it, Jon Moxley is for the people and the frustration of the locker room. So why would you want to do a hostile takeover of AEW just to try and lit a fire under everybody's ass to be at your standard, when that doesn't really work for the characters that are there? There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of illogical things that happen. And it's like, if anything, Moxie and crew should be the biggest baby faces by being advocates for everyone's frustration in the locker room, and have somebody else be the villain. So for example, let me put this into a perspective. If Jon Moxley hears the frustrations of the guys in the locker room and he wants to do something about it, then he should be the babyface. And we can all collectively agree that we don't like Don Callis. Don Callis could be the huge mega heel that is like, AEW is his. He's on top of the world. He has the best people in his team. and nobody can touch them. But then here comes Jon Moxley to be the leader and have the young guys get over somehow and have the young guys get some TV time, get a platform. They're representing Moxley. They're trying to do Moxley style. Like, I don't know. But just to bring the young guys along and have them as the voices to represent them, to be like, this is what AEW is about. AEW is about the young guys, the smaller guys, the guys that necessarily wouldn't have a chance to go to WWE, even though the landscape has changed. But stick with me here. Like, I think it should be the opposite. Because again, Jon Moxley trying to light a fire on everybody's ass to not be complacent, which, by the way, there are those in AEW that are probably complacent because they are getting a guaranteed check no matter what is happening, whether they are booked or not booked, but that's like a small percentage. But the other side of that is that the wrestlers that are frustrated, they are not complacent. They want a spot on AEW, but AEW Dynamite is 2 hours, and then there's Rampage, and then there's Collision, and then the ratings are like hella down. So it's like, who do you get to pick and choose that gets to go on the program? And since that Tony Khan revealed that he is booking these shows week to week to week to week and allowing the wrestlers to basically create their own stories with the bad help of the AEW writers and producers, it begs the question of, are those wrestlers who are frustrated truly complacent according to Jon Moxley? They are not. They want an opportunity. They want a spot. Sometimes they will use other opportunities to go to other locations if they can, or pursue other things by getting college degrees and stuff. So for him to say that everyone is complacent in AEW, that's kind of wrong, when he also says in the same breath that he hears the frustrations. He talks to other people in AEW and they agree with him and they're on the same board, the same page, I should say, the same page of like how they're feeling. But again, is Moxie truly going to stand on business and go to Tony Khan and be like, look, we really need to turn this ship around, because if not, it might end up failing? You have to invest in your wrestlers. You have to invest in a training facility. You have to invest and do something different from WWE. But Jon Moxley just cares about himself, his thoughts, and has yet to really stand on business to talk to Tony Khan about this, because if that was the case, things would be changing and this AEW Hard Reset will actually come to fruition. So I will say that the AEW wrestlers are not truly complacent with what they are being given, even though there are some people that will gladly take a check and sit home and do whatever they want and not be on TV, and it wouldn't bother them. But for the majority of the AEW wrestlers that have been signed on this bloated roster, it's quite the opposite. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below about that idea. And I think that it should be the opposite. But, you know, Jon Moxley is going to Jon Moxley. Now I will go over the TV Insider interview with Jon Moxley. So this is a question by TV Insider. The question is, how much of what we're seeing on TV is how you truly feel about the company? And this is Jon Moxley's response. He says, it's very real. I've never been much of a putting on an act kind of wrestler. Everything is always informed by where I'm at in real life outside the ring. I do take inspiration from all corners of the universe and funnel it through. By the way, I'm going to stop there and give some life advice. Please do not do that, because then everything becomes so jumbo and you need sort of a focus sometimes. But inspiration from all walks of life, corners of the universe, and funnel it through. You can do that, but that's very, very risky. I would suggest, just depending on the story being told, the situation you're in, that's what you use, rather than trying to use everything at your disposal, because then it comes out like crap. Jon Moxley goes on to say, at this point, when it comes to my career and life, I just have no time for bullshit anymore. But you were just saying that you hear the frustrations of the locker room and that the locker room agrees with some of the stuff that you say. So how do you have no time for bullshit anymore? See, this is what I mean. He doesn't stand on nothing when he does these interviews. If he's frustrated and if he wants to create a story of a AEW Hard Reset and to also say that there are these structures not put in place, but also say that he has no time for bullshit, bro, what? He goes on to say, I don't have time to beat around the bush. I'm not necessarily alone in my thoughts and my feelings. My feelings and motivations are quite ubiquitous throughout AEW. I'm just the one verbalizing it and getting to move it to action, though I can't do it by myself. Which is very understandable that you can't do it by yourself, but your name holds way more power, weight, progress than Jericho, let's say, because Jericho has done it all. Jericho's not really going to be fighting alongside you because he's going to be getting checks and just feeling himself for what he's currently doing. But think about this. Tony Khan allowed you to have the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship title in a time where you did not need it. And Tony Khan always speaks highly of you, and Tony Khan likes you. This is why you currently have 4 AEW championship title reigns out of anybody that has been there since day one. And by the way, you can find that tweet on my Twitter timeline at Marie_Shadows, where I question why Jon Moxley has 4 title reigns and no other AEW day one person has ever gotten to hold that belt. So for him saying that, even though he's verbalizing this and talking this and everybody knows his feelings and motivations throughout AEW and he knows he can't do it by himself, I mean, dude, your name holds a lot of weight in that company. But in the same breath, you'll say that you have no time for bullshit anymore. So why are things not moving a little bit more quicker? I mean, Tony Khan, again, thinks very highly of you to make you the 4-time AEW World Heavyweight Champion. That says a lot. The next question, I'm only going to just quickly talk about it. The next question is asking Jon Moxley about beating Danielson, and it's a pretty big deal and all this kind of stuff. There is something mentally wrong with Jon Moxley when he gives his answer, because he goes into a kayfabe answer, and he liked the way that he ended Danielson's career with suffocating him with a bag, which I do not recommend nobody doing. I condemn that. That was not safe, appropriate. Like, I have a whole video on talking about it. It was the worst thing to know that it happened in AEW and also in wrestling in 2024. Like, there was no point for that. But for him to say that it was a beautiful funeral, his mom was in the front row as he was just squeezing the life out of him in a very kayfabe way, and that it was just awesome to him. And I'm like, bro, you have some mental problems that you have to fix. Some red flags that you have to fix. Like, you could have just said that, you know, Danielson and I has been up and down the road. We were at WWE and it was amazing to be his last opponent. Unfortunately, things got out of hand and it is what it is. But I conquered the dragon because for so long I wanted people to know that I was better than him and that my name should only be spoken and that I am the true person, that I know to do all these things. Like, I'm just making this shit up at this point, but like something, you know, decent. Not no kayfabe answer of explaining the joy he got out of doing the horrible shit that he did to Danielson and having Danielson's mom watch in the front row and how he conquered the dragon and feeling the spirit leave. Like, no. You have some issues that you got to deal with, man. Jon Moxley says, I'm a servant to the fans, the ones who pay money to buy tickets and pay for parking and have to work the next morning and still stay out late to come to the show. People who supported us for this whole time and aren't on the ride yet will join the ride. I'm a servant of all the people here at AEW who want to be a part of something and believe in what this could be. Here is my 2 cents on that. Does Jon Moxley stay after hours to meet the fans and shake their hand, take pictures with them, sign their stuff, talk to them, and ask them what they truly feel about the product? Because week after week after week, and it is very apparent and it is very alarming that the ratings show completely different things. And ratings are an indicator of whether or not something is going to stay on the air. And to talk about ratings means to bring out the worst into people, because for some reason there's this discussion and like battle lines drawn when you talk about ratings, how you have people that would say, it doesn't matter, ratings aren't that important, why we're talking about ratings, I'm so sick of ratings. Well, have you ever stopped to ask yourself why your favorite TV show has yet to come back? Or if your favorite TV show got sold off, but they haven't put it back on air, and that was your favorite TV show and it was doing well, but then all of a sudden ratings drop? Or have you ever asked the question why certain shows never got a renewed second season, third season, when there was a lot of chatter behind it? Ratings matter. The demo doesn't really matter as much because anybody could tune in for watching a show, and it doesn't really matter. You could get anybody. You could get a casual fan, a hardcore fan, someone who never seen it, and they will basically like tune in. But ratings, the collective number of how many people are watching, is very important, because this will dictate what happens. Now, other people might tell me that because AEW already got their TV deal, that doesn't mean anything, that they don't have to worry about it. You have to worry about all of this stuff, because at any point they could be dropped. Warner Brothers Discovery can drop them without any notice and be like, hey, this wasn't really turning out good for my investors and the people of the network, so we're going to have to drop you. You're going to have to get a new home. It is very cutthroat. It's a cutthroat business. But because Warner Brothers Discovery does not have any other sports on their network at this moment, they have AEW, so AEW is surviving because ESPN went over to Amazon. And I bring up this point because Jon Moxley says that he's for the people that pay and go to the show and pay for the parking, and I get that. That's a very indie-rific way of thinking about professional wrestling. But when you are trying to sell out arenas that are 16,000 seats, you're going to have to talk to the fans and get the fans' input if you really want to make sure that AEW is going to be the place, the company that people want to work for, and try to make it into something different, that it is not WWE. And when I say that, that doesn't mean to go suffocate a man. That means that you're doing things that people enjoy, that people like, and there's logic behind it. Things make sense. You follow a formula. It doesn't have to be the WWE formula, but it has to be some type of formula to sort of establish your identity as what is AEW. The only thing that AEW had going for them, and I really want to emphasize the had, is because the EVPs were like, we're going to change the world. That is a wonderful vision, but it failed. Anyway, if Jon Moxley is so concerned about the fans that pay their ticket, that pay the parking, that have been on the ride since day one and haven't wavered, and try to get the people that were day one, like myself, back on the train, dude, you're not doing enough. You're not really doing enough. You're not listening to us on social media. I can point you into the right direction of who to listen to that give good constructive criticism and have some common sense and really have some good discussions with them. You're going to have to use social media if you are not staying after hours, after an AEW Dynamite, after a Rampage, after a Collision, to talk to the fans that apparently you want to be their servant to. Jon Moxley truly has to do the work, like Cody Rhodes says. Okay, so this next question is asking Moxley about sacrifices that he makes, and that his style is very physical, and does he ever draw a line? And Again, it's word salad. So I'm going to pick out something that I want to comment on. And he says, this is from Moxley. Moxley says, someone who has been doing this for a long time will naturally evolve. Sir, you haven't evolved. You have not evolved. I don't know what you're talking about. He goes on to say, that comes with experience. I'm of the opinion that it's hot or cold. Don't be lukewarm. That is bad advice for wrestlers. If you are a wrestler and you have made it this far, if you are lukewarm in the wrestling business and on your grind and on your way to try to get signed, it is okay to be lukewarm. Because if you're too hot, you peak too early. And if you're too cold, then you get forgotten. If you're somewhere in the middle, that means that people are still talking about you. You can still be very marketable. You can still have time to change up your moveset. You can still have time to test out stuff that normally you wouldn't naturally do. You have all the time in the world if you are lukewarm. I'd rather have a indie wrestler or even a professional wrestler, meaning someone from like WWE, MLW, who's like signed to a company. I'd rather have that wrestler be lukewarm than be all the way too hot and then peak very early and then lose that momentum and don't know how to get it back from the fans. And then I would not want a wrestler to be over too cold, because then you're just going to get forgotten. If you're in the middle, you are doing fine. You are doing amazing. So do not worry. Do not listen to Jon Moxley. If he ever tells you don't be lukewarm, be lukewarm. Jon Moxley also goes on to say, I was looking for this vision for this peaceful life before being called to war. Sir, what war have you been called to? The next question is not really a question, it's a statement from TV Insider. TV Insider gives Jon Moxley a statement. You see big things on the horizon for the company. And Jon Moxley goes and says, the potential of AEW is so fucking huge. We're not even scratching the surface of it. Just a roster of wrestlers is this ridiculous bounty of riches. Just a ridiculously stacked roster of the best wrestlers in the world. The best wrestlers in the world that keep getting injured. That should be an asterisk right there. And that's me giving my 2 cents. Jon Moxley goes on to say, so many people you haven't even seen yet of what they can do. I've seen what they can do. I can imagine what they can become if we water that seed and let it grow. I do hope that the wrestlers he's talking about actually get the chance to show what they can do. But if wrestlers are going to have match after match after match after match after match, that does not make a well-rounded wrestler. Matches don't really push story all that much. Having matches can play a role in story development and story progress and all of that, but it is very small when you need everything else, like all the other elements that make a good story. If all these wrestlers keep having matches, it doesn't make anything. The next part is about Marina Shafir, and I really just think that Moxley just overpraised, because it's one of those answers that you'll read that is so much praise. And in my head, I'm like, praise is good. I appreciate when people give praise and flowers to people and stuff, but this was just a little bit over the top where it wasn't believable. And to me, it's like, if you're praising her this much and it's not coming through on the TV screens, whenever someone turns on AEW Dynamite or Rampage or Collision, if all the praise that you're giving her is not coming through, then I'm going to just question it and be like, I don't know, man. Because wrestling fans are not going to seek out what she did in England. Wrestling fans are not going to seek out what she did in Defy. Some wrestling fans might seek out what she has done in Bloodsport when she gets booked. But for the most part, wrestling fans are not going to do the research. So if you are constantly praising her and saying how much she has evolved and how much she has adapted, and you're surprised that she's able to do this, she's able to do that, then if we're not seeing all of that on TV, then yeah, I'm just going to be like, all right, we'll see. All right, cool. The next question is, what stands out about facing Orange Cassidy and taking him to a new place in the ring? And here is Jon Moxley's quote, and I will break it down. Jon Moxley says, I think Orange Cassidy is a lot more serious than people give him credit for. He has been doing the same gimmick for so many years and brought that same gimmick to AEW and has yet to change it up. So how can we believe that Orange Cassidy is more serious if we have yet to actually see him more serious? Yeah, he might have more body language and is subtle and we really have to look at it, but there's no true dynamic change or moment where we could be like, that's it. That's the moment where he turned serious. We could do that with WWE adjacent wrestlers where we could be like, oh, that's the moment such and such wrestler became serious. But we can't do that with Orange Cassidy. Jon Moxley goes on to say, I've been watching him for years. His critics didn't understand him at first sight and said he would never be able to compete on a major league level. I instantly saw something different from what they were seeing, which again brings me back to my point. What are you seeing that we're not seeing? And if it's not coming across on the TV screen when we turn on AEW Dynamite, Rampage, and Collision, then yeah, we're going to question it. We're going to be like, what is it? Let us know. Bring us into the circle of knowing what you see. Jon Moxley goes on to say, you see his standard method in the ring. Someone might be thrown off or flustered or not know what to make of it. But if you studied the Book of Five Rings, you see Orange Cassidy. Guys, I had to look up what the Book of Five Rings are, and let me tell you what it is. The Book of Five Rings is a text on Kenjutsu and the martial arts written by Miyamoto Musashi around 1645. The book has been translated many times and has gained attention worldwide. Musashi's approach to martial arts and combat includes eliminating technical flourishes and understanding that technique is simply defeating your opponent. The book also deals with the subject of money making, with Musashi writing about the way of the merchant in the chapter titled Ground Book. Now, the question is, what does the Book of Five Rings teach? The broader lesson from this book is that an important part of understanding one's own way is to understand the way of one's opponent as precisely as possible. Musashi notes that although most schools have secret and ancient strategies, most forms are derivative of other martial arts. Now, what is the summary of the Book of Five Rings? The Book of Five Rings is divided into 5 books or chapters, each named after a different natural element important in Buddhism: ground, water, fire, wind, and what Musashi calls the void. So keep that all in mind as I continue to read Jon Moxley's quote from TV Insider. The psychological tactics for a guy who is supposed to be not serious. I don't see this guy smile. Is he a comedian? I don't see it. I'm starting to see in the last couple of weeks that this guy is a lot more cold-blooded, even borderline sociopathic. What is he really capable of? What is he hiding with this icy exterior? Nothing. Nothing, John. Stop making things up in your head. Jon Moxley goes on to say, it's a potentially much bigger challenge than I have anticipated. He is much more dangerous in invoking and revealing himself before my eyes. That's exciting. John, you literally tipped him over while he was duct tape and he tried to do those puny little shin kicks. That is very dangerous. Very dangerous from Orange Cassidy. Yeah, totally. Now we get to the good part, and hopefully I can wrap up soon. The next question is, what's next for AEW? And this is Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley says, there is no me being in there and losing. Everything is different now. It's life or death. It's really not that serious. It's not life or death. Stop it with the absolutes or it's either this or nothing. Like, relax, dude. Jon Moxley goes on to say, AEW has to be a success. If it's not, the business gets set back another 20 fucking years. Sir, your math is completely off. What are you talking about? The business doesn't get set back 20 years. It's going to leave a void if AEW ever goes under. And I will repeat that again. If AEW ever goes under, yes, it will leave a void, but there'll be something else in its place. It's not going to set back anything in 20 years. Jon Moxley's problem is that he thinks like an indie guy, like he's still an indie guy, and he has not accepted the fact that he has such a flourishing life because of WWE and because of the choices that he has made in order to survive and become a big ass name. This is what I have a problem with, and I think this is the disconnect and how he's not relatable to fans for fans to cheer him. It's that concept of that indie mindset where it's more like the grind. I don't know when I'm going to get my big opportunity. That's what it feels like from Jon Moxley just reading these responses. And it's like, stop it with that indie mindset, sir. You made it to the top of the mountain. Now teach other people how to make it to the top of the mountain. Jon Moxley goes on to say, I'm not willing to go through that again. See, exactly. It proves my point that he has that indie mindset. Indie wrestlers who are frustrated with their booking will have this kind of mindset. And I've been there and I've seen it and I've heard it, and I've also been frustrated with them with the way that they get treated on the indies when it comes to no pay, and they do overtime, meaning like breaking the ring down, setting the ring up, which you should be doing that. That's like a whole nother podcast for a whole nother time. But I have seen the frustrations, but the difference is that Moxley is not going to help put up the ring. Moxley is not going to help set up chairs. There has yet to be any kind of story out there of Jon Moxley coming in and doing the same thing as the indie guys. So he has to stop with this mentality of that he's not willing to go through that again. Sir, you're not setting up the rings. Jon Moxley goes on to say, others who I've known for 15 to 20 years are not willing to go through that again. How do you know? They don't have your mindset, sir. Don't speak for other people that you know. Jon Moxley goes on to say, it's at the hands of our generation. This is what we wanted to do and all we ever wanted to do. That's fine, but you also need to find a good hobby. Or learn how to produce, learn how to be on commentary, learn how to do stories, learn how to work a camera. There are so many other opportunities in the world of wrestling that if you just focus on being a wrestler, it's not going to end well. Learn how to use social media. Everyone is streaming these days. Jon Moxley goes on to say, the future is in our hands. Whatever AEW will become in the future is up to us. Who is us, by the way? Who is us? Jon Moxley goes on to say, frankly, in 5 years, nothing has been built. A lot has been built in 5 years. It's just in the most recent memory and in the last couple of years, ever since Cody Rhodes' departure and CM Punk's departure, it has went downhill, sir. So things have been built. You are a 4-time AEW World Heavyweight Champion. Things have been built. Jon Moxley goes on to say, we're going to build it right now. There has been no flag. AEW has not really nailed down its identity being a young company, and that's fine. It should have nailed down its identity in the beginning versions and ideas of AEW. The vision was to change the world, but like I said, it failed. And that's my comment, not Jon Moxley's comment. So Jon Moxley goes on to say, there has been a known flag for everyone to unify to say this is who we are, what we do, and the direction we're going. We're going to plant our flag. That's starting with me and the few people watching my back and others. Sir, you have done a takeover for AEW, but you are burying the competition and you are burying the wrestlers that are there. and it's not really helping. You're not getting anything over. It's all riddles and it's all nonsense. And you try to do a psychological villain when you try to be like, it's starting with me and other people. And then when you do these promos, they sound like a philosophical villain. I said a psychological villain, wrong thing. A philosophical villain that's not getting over. So there is, again, a disconnect between what you want to do and how you want to present it. And then when you present it, it doesn't come across the screen that way. Jon Moxley goes on to say, we're going to demand more of everybody around us. Please don't do that. And if you are going to do that, do it nicely and explain and have conversations. Don't be like, you're fired. Go work at Sunglass Hut. Jon Moxley goes on to say, this could be the best place I've ever worked. It could be 10 times better than anyone has ever worked. I can see how powerful wrestling can be. Wrestling can be powerful, but you have to make sure you don't lose the plot. And the last question is, what can fans expect from this match with Orange Cassidy? And Jon Moxley again goes into a word salad of like, oh, if they're paying for it, I'm going to give them a little bit more. I can't do cartwheels. I can't do any of the athletic stuff, but I can ram my elbows into the side of his head and crush his skull. And I'm a wrestler today and listen to my kayfabe stuff. Like, Jon Moxley needs to pick and choose what he wants to be whenever he does interviews. Whenever he does interviews for publications, I understand that these questions are supposed to be kayfabe to hype people up for the match and the pay-per-view, for people to buy the pay-per-view. But dude, pick and choose like what you want to stay in character. Like, I have a really awesome interview with Clark Connors, being 100 proof Clark Connors, and that was amazing that I did the interview with him, and it was all in kayfabe. He didn't have word salad. He didn't go off the rails and talk about something that's not related to the question or the answer. And that's something that Moxley needs to understand and try to at least hone in on, because when you're all over the place, it's just one of those things of like, dude, do you hear yourself when you have a conversation? In the first interviews, it's like he overheard a conversation, and rather than talking to the person about that conversation, he's all like, you're fired. Go work at Sunglass Hut. How dare you say that the people on the bottom of the card don't deserve some type of video? Well, if you felt that way, dude, you should have went to go talk to him. And then in this whole big interview, he got called into war, which I have no idea how that happened. He wants everybody to be at a higher standard. He wants to light a fire under people's butts in order to get them to that standard. He doesn't want people to be complacent. He doesn't want people to still take that check and lay down. And he thinks that if AEW doesn't succeed, it's going to set the wrestling world 20 years back. But the wrestling world is really hot right now. It's really good. It's really healthy with everything that is going on, even if I don't agree with everything. But objectively looking on the outside, all the way above, it is pretty healthy. It's nice. It's good. It's just that sometimes you got to think before you talk in interviews and want to know what character you want to go with. My whole thing with Jon Moxley and Orange Cassidy is that it is not believable. The way that they're going with this story and the way that they set up the hype for this, it's not translating well for the way that people should react to it. We're still like, why is this happening? You know, there are better options to face Moxley in a logical setting, such as Kenny Omega, which I will be talking about Kenny Omega in a different podcast episode. If Wardlow never nuked himself from AEW, he would have been another viable option. We could have got Will Hobbs to be that option to take down Moxley, but they went with Orange Cassidy, the smallest person of the roster, aside from everyone else that's small too. But they went with him, and it doesn't feel like it's supposed to be him because of the way that they built him up. Again, To have a baby face is to throw adversity at the baby face, to have him lose a couple of times, not have him win against bigger guys where it's a roll up, but it's the most disingenuous way to get a roll up. And I'm not talking about like cheating to get the roll up. It's like, oh my God, you hit a very soft move and then all of a sudden it's like roll up 1, 2, 3. And Orange Cassidy wins while taking the beating of his life and still comes out on top. Like those kind of stories and progress like doesn't really go over well because we could see it as a sham. And it's like, and with that, because I have been talking for quite a while, and I think on this episode I said that this is not going to be like 2 hours or 3 hours like some, because this is not like a monthly thing, or I might have said that in a previous one and I decided to redo it. But regardless, I'm going to wrap things up. I just really wanted to talk about Moxley, the whole situation, give my 2 points on everything, or 2 cents. And also, again, I will reiterate that do not go after Clive at all. Don't go after anybody that I talk about. The only reason why, again, I bring up certain situations to talk about is to be very transparent, to add more context, because again, I am very limited on X/Twitter and doing these podcast episodes to remind the whole world who listens to me across the globe, which, by the way, thank you for tuning in and listening around the world. For everyone that tunes in, I break down professional wrestling matches. I break down professional wrestling. I look at things objectively unless I tell you otherwise, that this bothered me for XYZ or this did not bother me for XYZ. And I would relate that to what people are saying on Twitter and X and social media. But for the most part, like this whole entire thing is me breaking down and giving social commentary to certain things and looking at it like, hey, this was wrong. Let's talk about it. Let's try to fix it. Hey, don't listen to this advice because of X, Y, and Z, because it's better to be like lukewarm or something. Or, you know, just to break down everything that we did here. So again, do not give him any type of backlash, nothing like that. I do have to say that just so that way people understand that we're all cool. We're all cool. But sometimes when conversations like that arise, it's good to have a teaching moment of like, this is my content. For the past 5 years, that has been my content, to really look at professional wrestling and break it down and talk about it and how to improve upon it. Like I said, unless I say otherwise. I will also say this quickly, that I do want AEW to succeed. It's just that no one knows how to be a leader in AEW and the management and Tony Khan and Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley will say all this stuff, but for some reason, none of that stuff is being put into action fast enough. Tony Khan has the funds. Tony Khan can get the resources. Tony Khan can do everything that he needs to do to improve his vanity project quicker than anybody else. But for some reason, Jon Moxley is still talking about these frustrations, still talking about there's so many good potential, big potential for AEW, but it has not even started. And even with Moxley and his crew, the Death Riders, it's not changing anything. And if you think that it is changing something, please let me know in the comments down below. And please go into detail if you're going to leave me a comment, because I honestly don't think that it's changing absolutely nothing. It's bearing and it is hurting the company more than trying to help the company. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to an episode of the Square Circle Podcast. Please make sure to support myself and the Square Circle Podcast and the whole community over at youtube.com/Square Circle Podcast. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video. And also click that bell notification to get the notifications, and leave a comment. Leave a like. The more likes you do sends it into the algorithm, and I'll be very appreciative and grateful. If you are not following me on Spotify, please make sure to follow me on Spotify. Leave a review as well if you would like to. And when you hit that follow button on Spotify, it gives you the notifications. It will alert you when a new episode is dropping. If you want the newsletter side of things, marieshadows.substack.com. You can sign up for free. You can also buy my merch at Fourth Wall. That link will be down in the description below. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter, at Marie_Shadows. And if you love Discord, because Discord is going to get nice and popping in 2025, next year. So if you like Discord communities that talk about wrestling, gaming, and anime, and showcases food recipes and what we're having for dinner, breakfast, lunch, whatever you want to put, then by all means, click that link as well in the description for the Discord link. Because we do not have the X amount of members, I cannot make a special link for that. So all links will be down in the description below. Anything helps. I appreciate you guys. And if you get any type of value from these episodes, please make sure to just follow, share, talk about it, chat with me. And you guys can always find me on Discord if you want. But yeah, guys, I will see you all in the next one.